I have a tablet. You can see it's right over here, in case you're wondering. And I use this thing for everything, okay? Now, it's not the best that you can get. It's about 10 years old, and when I got it, it was already secondhand. So it's seen some mileage, but I use this thing for everything, right? I teach from it, so when I do teaching, my notes are on here, okay? I lead meetings from this particular tablet. All through lockdown, when we had to film all those crazy kids' church things you've seen online, I put a magnet to the back of it and I stuck it up against the magnetic surface so I could look straight and talk to the camera. That's what we did with this thing. During load shedding, it's the TV in our household. It's been up mountains with me. It's Everly's brown noise. We used it to play her brown noise at night when she was struggling to sleep. I use it for recipes, to read. I literally use this thing for everything. It goes everywhere with me. Now, as I said, it's about 10 years old. It was secondhand when I got it. And so over the last little while, I've started to notice that, things don't seem to work quite as well as they used to. Okay? Not to mention, none of the apps and stuff like this, you go to update the app and they're like, no, we don't update apps this old anymore, And so I've started to notice the things started to get a little bit worn, started to get a little bit worn down. The speaker didn't work quite so lekker anymore, and all those things. And I've been watching this steady decline of one of my most useful tools for a long time now. So I did what anybody does when we face these kind of things. I started thinking, well, I'm going to need to replace it. Now, that was something that took a little bit of saving. So a little bit for the last little while, I've been limping along and putting a little money aside, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to get myself something nice. Now again, not something new. I can't afford something new, so now I'm looking around everywhere. I'm looking for another second-hand deal that'll give me another 10 years, And so last Saturday, I happened to go online onto an online shopping platform, and there I see, oh man, this is a great deal. It's a way better machine. It's newer. It's got all the good stuff that comes with it. I mean, it's still secondhand. It's still a little bit older, but it's a massive improvement. But most importantly, that price is just right. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is it, So I look at the seller's profile. I see he's got a lot of positive reviews. People have said that they've bought from him, and it's been good. And so I think to myself, well, okay, this is a fairly easy purchase, fairly easy deal to make. So I click buy, I make my payment across to this person or to the site, and then I wait, and I get a message to say, hey, your package is packed up and it's ready to come to you. Oh, and I'm excited, and I'm very excited. But I got this message to say the package is coming, but I got no tracking number. I got no notification from the delivery driver. None of the things that I'm used to. So this is all Saturday, and I'm waiting, and it's getting to Saturday afternoon. And Saturday afternoon, I get a message from the seller. Now, this is very strange because you work through the third party. There's no reason for them to contact you. And he sends me a message, and I won't read it to you, but it goes along the lines of, listen, so we see that when we completed your order, there was a bit of a mistake. We didn't charge, there's an international shipping thing that needs to come in, and we didn't add that to that. So if you could just transfer another 800 Rand into my bank account, I'll send you the bank details. We'll be able to release your purchase. Now, bearing in mind that the person was based in Port Elizabeth, and as far as I know, that's still not international shipping to this date. I may be under correction, but as far as I know, that's not right. You can imagine what I said to the person. I said, thank you very much, but I believe that you are trying to con me out of money. I am not going to send you 1 red cent. And what's more important is I'm going to report you to the platform through which we bought this thing, and I'm canceling this deal. Needless to say, I never heard from them again. So the end of the story is this. I'm fairly confident, for those of you guys who are worried about the money, I'm fairly confident I'll get it back. So don't worry about that. But this is what it's like. Have you ever had this experience before where you've encountered a con man, right? When you've encountered somebody who can just speak, like it just rolls off the tongue. They just tell you what they're thinking. They just say, oh, you can give us an extra this and this and this. And they talk you around in circles, and they've got all the right answers. Have you ever met someone like that? Man, it's so hard sometimes to tell if they were lying. In this case, again, being that Port Elizabeth is not an international destination, it was fairly easy to tell that the person was trying to con me. But other times, man, these guys are so good, eh? they're so slick, they're so confident, they just talk, and it's so natural, and it's so easy. And before you know it, you feel like your whole head is being twisted inside out. That's the reason we have the term con man or con artist. It's the shortened form, if you didn't know this, of confidence man. Or confidence artist. And the term itself comes from the 19th century, and what it depicts is unsuspecting victims or marks were induced to turn over money to someone they trusted. So in short, the idea of a con man is the con man convinces the mark to have trust in them by sounding so confident, by sounding so bold, by sounding like everything is, together and organized, and through that they manipulate people into giving them what they want or to doing what they want. Now, for the last couple of weeks, we've been doing a study in the introduction of Hebrews. And the author begins by explaining how, in no uncertain terms, Jesus is the Son of God. It's the very foundation of the book of Hebrews. And everything else is built off this idea that Jesus is the character, the exact representation of God's nature. Jesus is the Son who died for me. And because of that, I know that I have value. God has lavished his love on us. And he calls us children of God, and that's what we are. And we said that's in 1 John verse 3. Because Jesus is the Son of God, I know I have value. And last week we talked about how Jesus is the forerunner of the faith. And because he is the forerunner of the faith, I can follow after him, knowing that I am free and that I am holy. So what I want to do this morning is I want to pick up directly where we left off last week. And if you will turn in your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 2, we're going to read from verse 17. Hebrews 2, verse 17 to 18. This is what it says. It says, "For this reason, he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become the merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who suffered." See, the author introduces another new description of who Jesus is here. He is the merciful and faithful high priest. And what will happen is we'll see that the author will continue to expound on this in Hebrews chapter 4 from verse 14. So if you guys have got your Bibles open, flip over to Hebrews 4. We're going to read from verse 14. And this is what it says. It says, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God, to other gifts and sacrifices for sin. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins, as well as the sins of the people. And no one takes his honor on himself, but he receives it when he is called by God, just as Aaron was. In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, 'You are my son. Today I've become your father.' And he says in another place, 'You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek.' During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of all eternal salvation for all who obey him. He was designated by God a high priest in the order of Melchizedek." Part 3, the last part of our introduction. Jesus is the great high priest. And the author goes on to talk more about this in chapter 7 and the first part of chapter 8. And to be honest with you, we could spend weeks even diving into this description of who Jesus is, that Jesus is the great high priest, and still not even come close to discovering everything that the Word has to say about this. But for today, we're going to be just zeroing in our thinking and on chapters 4 and 5. Now, Jesus, the great high priest, is a lot like Jesus, the Son of God. It's a term we've heard before. For some of us, we've perhaps heard this term many times in many sermons and many teachings and many songs and many things. But what does it really mean that Jesus is the great high priest? Well, before we can answer that, I need maybe to just talk a little bit about what would the Jewish Christians reading this have understood. So when they heard Jesus is the great high priest, what was going on in their thinking? What about their history? What about their background? What about their culture was coming to mind when they heard this? So let's look at the Old Testament priesthood and the sin offering. See, the priesthood began officially when Moses anointed his brother Aaron. Aaron wasn't chosen by Moses to be a priest, nor was it a role that he had volunteered for. He didn't come to Moses and go, "Hey, Moses, so I hear there's a position open for high priest. Here's my CV, and by the way, I'm your brother, so maybe you want to do a little something, something." That wasn't how it went about. No, he was chosen by God. And more importantly, we see that the priesthood always has its origin with God. But it wasn't just Aaron who was chosen. The priesthood was handed down patrilineally, meaning from father to son. So the role of the priest was to position themselves between God and man. So you had the people, you had God, and you had the priest who stood in the middle. Their objective was to represent God to man and man to God. That was what they did. But why do we need this? Why do we need this middleman? Why do we need this in-between person? Because the truth is, if I remember my Bible stories from when I was a Sunday school teacher, and I do, thanks, Mom, it wasn't like that in the garden, was it? With Adam and Eve. There was no mediator. There wasn't somebody interpreting between them and God in the garden, was there? No. They walked together. There was a comfort. There was an ease. There was conversation. There was closeness. Between Adam and Eve and God, there was confidence. But that confidence, that closeness was destroyed by sin. A condition, I'm sorry to report, we all share. So now we needed a priest to go to God for us. And they couldn't just go at any time. The priest couldn't just decide, "Hey, I feel like going to God today. It feels like a good day to do that. I think I'm going to go and do that." No, they had appointed times. And they would apply the sacrifice of blood to the altar as a temporary atonement for sin. They taught the people, they purified the temple, and they communicated God's blessing. And so only a select few people would ever become priests, would ever know what it was like to hold that position. Only a few would ever be able to go into God's presence. And even then, it was with this good deal of fear. Because, by the way, you didn't just pitch up and go, "Hey, God, so I'm here today to do some sin offerings and stuff. If we can make this quick because I've got other things I need to do." No, you came with humble reverence. Because if you came into God's presence the wrong way, you could be guaranteed you would experience God's wrath. And so what we see throughout Israel's history with the priesthood is that when the priests are serving God, when the priests did their jobs properly, when the priests served God faithfully, the people would follow, and God would bless the nation. But then we would see the opposite as well. When the priests didn't do their job well, when they didn't serve God faithfully, the people would go after all kinds of idols and sin, and God's judgment would be upon the nation. So the whole Old Testament really, and I'm just doing a summary here, is this story of great tragedy that once we walked in closeness with God, once there was a confidence with which we approached to God, but it's not like that anymore now. You can't do that. It's broken. Sin has come in. It's changed everything. And now the best you can hope for is a priest to once a year go into God's presence to offer a temporary payment for your sin and hope for the best. That's where you're at right now. Year after year, they would make sacrifices on our behalf, but none of them would ever be sufficient to buy our freedom. That was the priests. They were far from perfect. They failed, they fell short. They showed themselves unfaithful, unholy, and unworthy. But more importantly, no priest, no matter how faithful, ever got close to knowing what it was like to have that relationship that Adam and Eve had with God, to know what it was like to have that closeness in the garden. But Jesus is our great high priest. And the priesthood to this point, to Jesus, is to be understood as a type. Now, what does that mean? It means the priesthood to this point was understood to be a sign, an example, an illustration, if you will, to point to the great high priest. So when you looked at the priesthood in the Old Testament, and then you saw Jesus, you were like, oh, I get it now. These guys were an example of this. This is the real deal, and these guys were an example, so I could recognize it when I come. Jesus is the true great high priest. And the point the author is making here is that just as with the angels, Jesus is superior to every high priest who came before, because he has done what no other high priest could ever do. He is God's son, and through his perfect life, Jesus enters that role as mediator between us and God. And he doesn't apply the blood of bulls and goats as a temporary cover for sin. No, the blood that Jesus, our high priest, brings to the altar is his own. A once and always sacrifice for sin. Because Jesus is our great high priest. He took on God's wrath on himself, paying the price for our hamartia and taking away the barrier that cuts us off from God. Jesus is our great high priest because he is also the sacrifice that takes away the sin of the world. The author then goes on to describe how Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. What does that mean? Well, Melchizedek was the king of Salem. Yay, And Abraham encounters Melchizedek in Genesis. And I won't go into the whole background, but what's important here and what is unique about Melchizedek is that Melchizedek was both a king and a priest. Now, this is very rare. Kings and priests were never the same person. Kings were one order, and priests were one order. They never crossed over. They never interchanged. But Melchizedek is described as being both king and priest. It's incredibly unique. And so the author that goes on to say that just as the priests were a type for Jesus, an imperfect version of the perfection of Jesus, they illustrated imperfectly what he was in perfection. So Melchizedek is also a type. While he was an earthly king and priest, Jesus is the perfect, eternal, universal king and priest. And Jesus is not just our great high priest. He is also our king. He is priest and heir to all things. Jesus is the great high priest. And because Jesus is the great high priest, there comes with that great benefit, great blessing for each and every one of us. And one of the greatest, biggest blessings is found right here in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. I'll read it again. It says this: "Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." It's a powerful scripture, that. And let's dive a little bit deeper into that. The author begins by encouraging us to approach or to draw near to God's throne. The Greek word we translate there as approach or draw near is the Greek word periskomai. Excuse me. And it is literally to approach, to come near, or to visit. Now, hang on. Doesn't that sound a little familiar? To visit. Is that ringing any bells here this morning? Because we spent all of 2022 talking about God's visits, if you remember. Okay, we talked about how God wants to visit us in our mess, how He visits us in our suffering, and when He visits us, He isn't just dropping in to go, "Hello, hi there. I don't really want to touch anything here because everything's a little bit dirty and everything's a bit of a mess, and I don't want to get your dirt on me, so I'm just here to say hello and bye." No. He doesn't visit us like that. He comes to make His home with us. I love this. God doesn't just come to visit us in our mess, but He invites us to come into His perfection. He invites us to visit Him. What a privilege we have. So paraskomai is to visit, to approach, to draw near. And here in Hebrews 4, what it literally means is to come near to God, to draw near to Him in prayer, sacrifice, worship, and devotion of life. See, the author is telling us to draw near to God with every part of our lives. Every part of who we are should be drawing near to God at all times. And how do we do that? He answers that question too, with confidence. Confidence is the word parousia. And parousia means freedom in speaking everything one thinks. So it means there's no fear, there's no hesitation, there's no, I wonder how this is going to be taken, I wonder how this is going to be spoken. It means I speak freely what's on my heart. There's no reserve. It's bold, it's confident. And so we are to draw near to God with parousia. But this is important. Parousia is only possible as the result of all guilt being removed by the blood of Christ. And it manifests itself in confident praying and witnessing. So here's the truth. We can come to God with confidence because the guilt is paid. The high priest has paid with blood that is covered over once and for all. So therefore, I can draw near with confidence now. I can pray with confidence. I can witness with confidence. I can share my heart with my King with confidence. So we can draw near with freedom and ease, a lack of reserve in our whole life because our guilt has been paid by our great high priest. So we draw near, paraskomai, with confidence, parousia, to receive mercy. And that word is elos. And elos means mercy, compassion, or active pity. So one of the things we can expect that when we draw near to God with confidence is we can expect to receive comfort in our suffering. We can expect to receive empathy. We can expect to receive care. We can expect to receive compassion. We will find comfort through all our pain, all our hurtness, all our sickness, all our failure, all our struggles, all our challenges. We will find comfort for those things when we draw near to God with confidence. Let me ask you this morning, how badly do we need this? How badly do we need that comfort? How badly do we need that encouragement? How badly do we need someone, not just someone, the King of Kings, to come and put his arm around us and say, I see what's happening. Oh, and it's still happening. But I see it, and I'm here, and I've got my arm around you, and that's okay. And all you needed to do was just come near. Just come with confidence. It's waiting for you. How badly do we need that comfort in the midst of the battle? Compassion from God right there in my suffering. So we draw near, paraskomai, with confidence, parousia, to receive mercy, elios, and to find grace. And this is the last Greek word, I promise. That word grace is the word charsi, and it means favor or goodwill. But not just any favor, God's favor. Isn't that what we all want to know in our life? Don't we all want to look at our lives and say, man, I see God's favor at work in my life. I want to see I see the favor of God in my family. I see the favor of God in my heart. I see the favor of God in my work and in my business. Isn't that what we all want? We want to see the favor of God over our whole life. God comforts us in our suffering. He shares in our pain, and He responds with compassion to our suffering because He has been through it all. The Son chose to lay aside His glory, so He understands our struggles. He understands our weaknesses. In my suffering, in my failure, He has compassion on me. But not just that. He has mercy on us, compassion in our struggle, but He also showers His favor upon us. Now we have comfort in our suffering, and into that suffering, God starts pouring His favor, and we can receive all of these things as we confidently draw near to God. How awesome is that? You don't have to do something to earn this. You don't have to be better. You don't have to have spent tons of time trying to win God's favor. You don't have to try and put on a nice show. No, all you have to do is draw near confidently. And there is absolutely everything that we need. Because Jesus is the great high priest, I have access to God. I can come to God. I don't need another priest. I don't need another mediator. I don't need someone to stand between me and God. No, what I can do is what Adam and Eve did, which is walk together with the Lord in the cool of the day. Every single thing that was lost, we get back because Jesus is our high priest. And more than just having access to God, I am secure in Him, because when I come to Him with confidence, I receive mercy and grace. I am secure. My struggle cannot shake me because I am receiving God's comfort, and He is pouring His favor into my situation. And so this all sounds brilliant. I hope it sounds brilliant. It sounds brilliant to me. But we're left with an inevitable question. If we can draw near to God, if we can have that confidence, if we can find that grace and mercy, that comfort and favor, if we have all this access and security through our great high priest, the question we have to ask is, why don't we use it? Why don't we use it? Why isn't drawing near to God the most natural thing that we do? Why isn't it the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is like take a breath because you have to live, and then the very next thing I do is draw near to God? Why is it not the most natural thing I do? Well, I believe it's because we don't have confidence. Instead, what we have is fear. You see, we feel all this guilt. We feel all the shame. We don't have a freedom in our hearts. We are unsure. We are insecure about where we stand with God. So instead of confidence, what we have is fear and misunderstanding. And to me, there are 4 main fear statements that keep us from confidence in God. And there's probably a whole bunch more, but these are the 4 main ones I could think of. And the first one is this, I don't know what God's like. Well, I've been coming to church, I've been reading, but in my mind, this picture of what God's like, it's not very clear. I don't quite understand who He is. I'm not quite sure about Him. You know, I know some stuff that I've heard, and God is love, but I'm not really even sure what that means exactly. You know, so I don't really know who God is. I'm unsure. God feels like a stranger. I don't know Him. I don't know what He's like. I don't know what He's about. I don't know what His motives are. What is He after? What does He want? How could I ever feel confident drawing near to someone I don't know? How would that even be possible? Except what I want to tell you this morning is that fear is a lie. Because we know who God is. You know who God is. The author of Hebrews has already exposed this lie in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3. We talked about this week 1. Do you remember this? Hebrews 1:3, the Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by His powerful word. And after He had provided purification for sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. Jesus is the exact representation of God's nature, His character. Jesus Himself would say in John 14:9, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. So don't say you don't know what God is like. You know what Jesus is like. You've seen what He's like. You've seen the things you've read the things He's said. You've seen the things He has done. You have heard Him speak His heart. You have seen Him weep. You know what God is like because the Son is the exact representation of God's nature. He chose to come in this world. He chose to be the mediator between us and God, to be our great high priest. I can draw near to God with confidence because I know exactly who He is, because I know exactly who Jesus is. The second fear is that we're afraid of what God might say to us if we ever did come near to Him. What's He going to say when I get there? Is He going to look down on me? Is He going to give me a rap over the knuckles? Is He going to tell me how disappointed He is in me? Is He going to tell me about how when I was a baby He expected so much more from me? Is He going to look at me and tell me, you've messed up for the last time. I'm done with you now. I'm done listening to your stories. Is He going to tell me that He's had it up to a year with me? Is He going to tell me what a gigantic failure I am and how I've made all the wrong choices? is he going to say to me that he regrets that I was ever born? How could I ever come with confidence to someone like that? How could I come with confidence to someone who I don't know what they're going to say to me? I don't know what they're going to put on me. I don't know if I should be afraid of what they're going to say. How could I ever come with confidence to someone like that? Again, the author has exposed this fear for what it is all the way back in week 1. Hebrews 1 verse 2. Does this sound familiar? But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, who he appointed heir over all things. Through him, he has made the universe. See, we know what God is going to say to us because the Son has spoken to us in these last days. He tells me things. He tells me things like I am chosen. He tells me things like I am free. He tells me that I am holy. He tells me that I'm a child of God. He tells me that I'm going to spend eternity with him. He tells me that I'm safe. He tells me I'm not alone. He tells me that he will never forsake me. He tells me that even my mistakes are not fatal, and so much more. How could I ever be afraid to hear that? How could I ever be afraid to come to someone who speaks those things over my life? No, I can come to God with confidence because I know what he has already said to me. The next fear is one I think a lot of us struggle with. The fear of not really knowing how God feels about us. Does he even think about me at all? I mean, do I even matter? I mean, I know everybody is important, but I mean, is that true? Does it really matter? Does God even think about me? Or am I just kind of running around here, sort of lost in the wilderness? And maybe every now and then he stops in to check if I'm still alive, but other than that, he doesn't bother with me. How could I ever possibly come to someone who doesn't seem to care about me at all? Again, in this introduction to the book of Hebrews, we have seen that lie exposed. Last week we read Hebrews 2:9, and it says, "But we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor, because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone." You are so loved because the Son died for you. And what does that tell us? If the Son thought it was good enough to die for me, if he thought it was important enough to die for me, it tells me something about my value. It tells me something about who I am. I have great value to God. You are loved more than you could possibly imagine. That is how God feels about you. I can come to God with confidence because I know exactly how he feels about me. The last fear is this one. I don't think I'm good enough to draw near to God. I don't think I'm a bit of a mess. I've got all this stuff going on. I'm always struggling with things. You know, I make these decisions that I'm going to serve God, that I'm going to do better, and then I mess up again. And it seems like no matter how hard I try, I always go back to the same things. I find myself caught up in the same sin and the same temptation. I'm not sure if I'm good enough for God. We feel like our mistakes, our sin has tarnished us for life. That we will be forever defined by our failures and our mistakes. How could I ever possibly come to God with confidence when I know exactly who he is and he knows exactly who I am, an absolute sinner, a total mess on my best day? How could I possibly come to God with confidence when I feel so worthless? Let me remind you of this verse. We read it last week. Hebrews 2:11. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. You were made holy. Not because of yourself, but because our great high priest is also the sacrifice for our sin. Because he is holy, we are made holy, and I can draw near to God with confidence because I am holy. So what I want to say to you this morning is this. You know, when we read this verse, you know, let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. It's far from a flippant statement. It's far from the author just throwing something out there going, oh yeah, just draw near to God. Just draw near to God. I mean, probably something will happen, I guess. Maybe something good, I don't know. It's not like that. When he tells us to draw near to God with confidence, he has already anticipated every reservation we could possibly have, every expressed fear in our hearts for the lies that they are in the very first 2 chapters. Before only the high priest could come into God's presence, and then only on one occasion, the beautiful relationship of Eden had been broken until our great high priest came and offered up his own life on the altar. Now we can draw near to God with confidence because there are no more barriers. We are free. Our guilt has been washed away by the blood of Jesus, and that's why we draw near. And that's why we can, first of all, pray with confidence. Okay? Not praying, wondering, hey, is God hearing me at all? Am I just wasting my time? Am I just sitting here repeating things like an idiot? No. We can pray with confidence because we know our God hears us because we draw close to him with confidence. We can enjoy have the joy of communication, not just talking to God, but God talking back to me. Oh, how beautiful is that? How beautiful is it when the Lord speaks to me? We can pray with confidence. We can worship with confidence, not half-hearted, standing there forgetting the very words you just declared the moment they left your mouth. But worshiping in spirit and in truth, pouring out praise on the one who lavished his love on us. We can sacrifice with confidence. Oh, not blood, not bulls, not goats. I'm talking about those little things, those little areas of our lives and our hearts that we keep separate from God. I'm talking about your temper. I'm talking about the fact that at the end of the day, man, you just need to get that little drink so that you can just ease off from the day. You just need to get that little buzz going so that you will be all right. I'm talking about that need you have to speak behind someone else's back so you can feel better about yourself. I'm talking about that need we have to put others down to lift ourselves up. I'm talking about that need we have to be jealous and to chase after other those things. I'm talking about that need we have to put our hand in our back pocket and go down to Grand West and to blow a month's paycheck. I'm talking about those things we keep hidden from God. Let me ask you something this morning, and this is the audience participation part of this morning. I want you to answer this question. You don't have to answer it out loud, but I do want you to answer this question. And the question is simply this: is there anything better than God's favor? It's a yes or a no question. Answer that for yourself this morning. Is there something that I think is better than God's favor? Nothing. Oh, well, if the answer to you is nothing, then it's easy to sacrifice, isn't it? Oh, I can give up that drink. I can take my hand out my pocket. You know what? I can learn to watch the things that I can say. I can learn to watch the things I think, because I can do that sacrifice with confidence, because there is nothing better than the favor of my Lord. There's nothing better than drawing near to him. I can sacrifice with confidence. Live a life with a devoted heart. Confidence in your relationship with God. Not wondering if he's forgotten about you because things have gotten difficult. Not wondering, if maybe something has changed between you and God. Not wondering if maybe he's changed his mind about you. Not constantly flip-flopping all over the place because there's no security. Going, oh, one day, man, I'm so close to God. I was in church, and we were worshiping, and I put up my hands, and I had this experience, and it was awesome. And then the next day, it's like, oh, why do I even bother? No, now we draw near to God with confidence because we know that this is what God has spoken to us in these last days by his Son. Confidence, the ability to think and to speak without hesitation, that natural feeling of comfort and ease, that complete lack of reserve. It's not something we would often describe of our relationship with God, is it? We wouldn't use those words often, would we? Now, we struggle with confidence because we're afraid. We're afraid. We're burdened by guilt, shame, and failure, all our past mistakes. And the bottom line is we're just insecure. But it doesn't have to be that way. No, because Jesus is the great high priest. I am secure and I have access to the Father. I can draw near to God with confidence, in freedom, without reserve, despite my hurts, despite my fears, despite my suffering, despite my failure. And when I draw near to God with confidence, I can find comfort and I can find favor. It's time to draw near to God with confidence.